Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 disturbing stories from people working night shifts across New York City. These are tales of workers who discovered that some parts of the city should never be visited after dark, and some jobs come with encounters that no paycheck can justify. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The MTA doesn't advertise how many abandoned subway stations exist under New York. I worked track maintenance for 3 years, mostly the night shifts because the pay differential made my rent almost manageable, and I got used to being underground when the train stopped running. The tunnels had their own ecosystem down there. The smell of brake dust and old water, the way sound carried wrong, bouncing off tile and concrete until you couldn't tell which direction anything came from. I didn't mind it, honestly. It was steady work, and after a few months you stopped thinking about the weight of the city sitting on top of you. My supervisor was this guy named Dennis Kowalski, maybe 50, with hands that looked like he'd been working with tools since he was born. He assigned me and another guy, Patrick something, I never caught his last name, to inspect the old City Hall station. This was February, I think, or early March. The dates blur together when you work overnights. City Hall Station closed in 1945, something about the curves being too tight for modern trains, and it just sat there in the dark for decades. Tour ran through sometimes during the day, historical society stuff, but at night it belonged to us and the maintenance schedules. Patrick called in sick at the last minute. Food poisoning, he said. So it was just me walking down the access tunnel with my equipment bag and a headlamp, following the curve of the old platform. The station was beautiful in a forgotten way, original tilework still intact. These vaulted ceilings covered in Guastavino tile that caught my light and turned it warm. I'd been down there twice before with crews, quick visual inspections mostly, and it had always felt empty in a normal way, like a museum after hours. I was checking junction boxes along the wall, making notes on my clipboard, when I heard the footsteps. They were deliberate, measured, coming from deeper in the tunnel, where the platform curved out of sight. My first thought was another worker, maybe someone from the overnight structural team, but I hadn't seen any notices about other crews in this section. I called out, my voice sounding flat against all that tile. The footsteps stopped. I stood there in the quiet, listening to water dripping somewhere far off, feeling stupid for calling out to what was probably just my own footsteps echoing weird. The tunnels did that. I went back to my work, checking the voltage readings on the old electrical panel when I heard it again. Closer this time, definitely footsteps, but with something off about the rhythm, not quite right, too even maybe or too patient. "Hey, there's someone here," I called again, louder this time. I told myself it was probably security doing rounds. Dennis hadn't mentioned anyone else, but communication wasn't exactly the MTA's strong suit. The footsteps stopped again the moment my voice faded. I finished with the electrical panel faster than I needed to and moved down the platform toward the tunnel mouth, my headlamp cutting through the dark. That's when I noticed the footprints. The platform was dusty, undisturbed except for my own tracks and these others. Barefoot prints. Not like someone took their shoes off, but properly barefoot, with toe spread and arch definition. They led from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, walked the length of the platform, and then just stopped about 20 feet from where I stood. No return prints, nothing leading away. Just stopped, like whoever made them vanished mid-stride or went straight up into the ceiling. My mouth went dry in that way it does when your brain knows something's wrong before you let yourself think it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a homeless person who'd found a way into the tunnels, someone good at not leaving tracks, but that didn't explain why the prints just ended. I'd been in these tunnels long enough to know the homeless population that lived down here, and they wore shoes. They had to. The rats alone made barefoot impossible. I kept working because that's what you do. You have a job, you finish it, even when your hands are shaking enough that you have to redo a bolt connection twice. I moved to the far end of the platform where the curve was tightest, where the old exit stairway was sealed with a steel door that hadn't been opened in decades. The door was still locked, I checked, but there were scratches around the frame. Fresh scratches, bright metal showing through the old paint and rust, like something had been testing the edges looking for weakness. That's when I heard my name, clear as anything, echoing from back the way I came. Marcus. Just that, my name, in a voice I almost recognized. It sounded like my father, who'd been dead for 6 years. Same cadence, same slight accent. I spun around, my headlamp sweeping the platform, and saw nothing. The batteries in my lamp flickered, dimmed, then came back. In that brief moment of darkness, I swear I saw something standing in the curve of the tunnel. Tall, too tall, with arms that hung down past where they should have stopped. The light came back and there was nothing there. Just empty platform and my equipment bag where I'd left it, and those goddamn barefoot prints in the dust. I made a decision then that probably saved me. I grabbed my bag, I grabbed my clipboard, and I walked very quickly back toward the access tunnel, forcing myself not to run because running felt like it would trigger something, like whatever was down there would chase if I ran. The footsteps started again behind me, following, matching my pace exactly, staying just out of sight around the curve. I could hear breathing too, or something like breathing, this wet rasp that echoed off the tiles. I kept walking, my hand on the wall to steady myself, and I started counting steps because my supervisor had drilled it into us. Know your distances, know your exits, count everything. 87 steps to the access door. At step 60, something touched the back of my neck. Not grabbed, just touched, fingertips. Cold enough to burn, trailing down toward my collar. I jerked forward, almost falling, and that's when I did run. The footsteps behind me multiplied, like there were suddenly 4 or 5 sets, all running in perfect synchronization, and I could hear that voice calling my name again, but from in front of me now, from the direction of safety. I hit the access door hard enough to bruise my shoulder, slammed it behind me, and didn't stop moving until I reached the surface entrance. Dennis found me sitting on the sidewalk on Worth Street, equipment scattered around me, shaking too hard to hold my coffee. He asked what happened, and I told him equipment malfunction, needed to reschedule. He looked at me like he knew I was lying but didn't want to push it. I went back down 2 weeks later with a full crew, daylight hours, telling myself I'd imagined it or misinterpreted something. The station looked exactly the same, beautiful, abandoned, normal. But when we were packing up to leave, I noticed something on the ground near where I dropped my equipment that night. It was a footprint pressed into the dust, barefoot, but this one had 6 toes perfectly formed all in a row. Nobody else noticed it and I didn't point it out. I transferred to above-ground maintenance the next month. I still take the subway every day like everyone else, but I don't go underground for work anymore. Sometimes when I'm on a train late at night and we pass through City Hall, I look out the window into that dark curve and I wonder if something's still standing there waiting. And I wonder whose voice it'll use next. Story 2. St. Benedict's Hospital sat in a forgotten corner of Staten Island, right on the edge where the city started turning into marsh and industrial wasteland. The place had been closed for about 8 years when I took the security job. Some kind of funding issue or health violations. The details were fuzzy, and nobody seemed to care enough to explain it properly. The building just sat there, 6 stories of early 1900s brick and broken windows, waiting for either demolition or conversion into condos that would never come. My job was to walk the perimeter twice a night, check the ground floor for break-ins, and basically make sure nobody was squatting or stripping copper. The pay was decent for essentially doing nothing, and I needed the money. My name's Angela Reeves, and I was 29. trying to save up enough to move somewhere with better prospects than overnight security work. My boyfriend at the time, Jake, thought I was crazy for taking a job in an abandoned hospital, but he'd never been broke enough to care about the difference between $12 and $15 an hour. The hospital had that particular kind of silence that old medical buildings have, where you can almost hear the ghost of all the sound that used to fill it: call buttons, heart monitors, footsteps in hallways. I'd been working there for maybe 5 weeks when things started feeling off. Nothing concrete at first, just a sense that the building was more occupied than it should be. Shadows in windows when I checked the exterior. Lights I could swear I'd turned off being on when I came back around. Small things I rationalized as either my imagination or some electrical systems still having power for reasons I didn't understand. It was a Thursday night, I'm pretty sure, around 2 in the morning. I was doing my interior check of the first floor, walking through what used to be the emergency department. My flashlight was good, department issue, bright enough to paint the old triage area in sharp detail: overturned chairs, paperwork scattered on the floor, a wheelchair sitting in the corner like someone had just gotten up and walked away. I was marking my checklist when I heard a sound from deeper in the building. A rhythmic squeaking, like wheels that needed oil. Another wheelchair moving somewhere on the floor above me. I stopped breathing to listen better. The sound moved steadily across the ceiling, tracking from east to west, then stopped. I told myself it was the building settling or pipes expanding or any of the 100 normal sounds that empty buildings make, but it sounded exactly like a wheelchair. I'd spent enough time in hospitals visiting my grandmother to know that particular squeak. I should have left then. That was my first mistake. Instead, I convinced myself I needed to investigate because that's what I was being paid for. If squatters were up there, better to know about it. I found the stairwell, the door heavy and stiff from disuse, and climbed to the second floor. The hallway stretched in both directions, patient rooms lining both sides, everything visible in the thin light from the street that came through broken windows. Empty, completely empty. No wheelchair, no anything. I walked the hallway anyway, checking rooms, finding nothing but old hospital beds and medical equipment that hadn't been worth moving. I was about to head back down when I noticed one of the rooms at the far end had a light on, not bright, just a dim glow coming from under the closed door. I hadn't seen it from the stairwell because of the angle, but now it was obvious. Steady, yellowish light, like someone had lit a candle. Every instinct I had said to leave. Go back to the security office, call my supervisor, let someone else deal with it. But I was still in that phase where I didn't trust my instincts, where I rationalized everything as paranoia or nerves. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against it, listening. I could hear something inside, breathing, slow, steady, mechanical almost, and under that a faint beeping, like a heart monitor. I opened the door, I don't know why. The room was dark except for that glow, which was coming from an old patient monitor that somehow had power. The screen showed a heartbeat, regular and strong green line bouncing in steady rhythm. In the bed under a thin hospital blanket was a person. I could see the shape clearly, the rise and fall of breathing, the outline of a head on the pillow. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking. "You can't be in here. This building's closed." The shape didn't move. The breathing continued, steady and wrong, because I could see the blanket moving, but the rhythm didn't match human breathing. Too slow, too deep. The beeping from the monitor started to speed up, the green line jumping faster. I stepped closer, my flashlight raised, and pulled back the blanket. I need you to understand, I pulled it back expecting a person, maybe someone homeless or mentally ill who'd found a way in. What I found was an occupied hospital gown. That's the only way I can describe it. The gown had shape, had weight pressing into the mattress, had arms filling the sleeves. But when I pulled the blanket away, there was nothing inside the gown. It was empty, flat, like someone had laid out clothes on a bed, except these clothes were still shaped like they were being worn. The monitor started screaming that flatline sound and all the breathing stopped. The gown collapsed completely flat against the sheets. I backed up into the wall, my flashlight swinging wild, and that's when I noticed there were wet footprints leading from the bed to the bathroom. Fresh footprints, barefoot, small like a child's. The bathroom door was closed. I watched it from where I stood frozen against the wall, and I heard a sound from behind it, a small sound like someone trying not to cry, like a kid hiding and failing to stay quiet. The doorknob started to turn slowly, and I saw small fingers gripping it from the inside. Child-sized fingers, but they were too long with too many joints, bending in ways fingers shouldn't bend. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran back down the hallway, down the stairs, out through the emergency department exit, and I didn't stop until I was sitting in my car with the doors locked. I called my supervisor and quit over the phone right there. He tried to get me to explain, but I just kept saying I quit, I'm done, until he gave up. The next day I went back during daylight to get my equipment locker cleared out. I had to. They were taking the cost out of my last check if I didn't return the flashlight and keys. I brought Jake with me for backup, told him I'd seen something that scared me but didn't give details. We went up to that second floor in full daylight, sun streaming through the windows, and I showed him the room. The bed was there. The monitor was there, unplugged, screen dark. No gown on the bed. But on the floor, leading from the bed to the bathroom, were those footprints. Still visible, still wet. Jake saw them too. He touched one and his finger came away damp. We didn't go to the bathroom. We left and we never talked about it after. I heard 6 months later that St. Benedict's finally got demolished. I wonder if the crew that brought it down noticed anything strange in room 237. I wonder if those footprints were still there when the wrecking ball hit. I wonder what they released when the walls came down. But mostly, I try not to think about the sound I heard from behind that bathroom door. That sound like a child crying. And I try not to imagine what would have happened if I'd waited for that door to open all the way. Story 3. The Starlight Diner sat on 10th Avenue in Hell's Kitchen, and it had been there since the 1950s. One of those classic aluminum-sided places that served breakfast 24 hours and had booths with red vinyl that had been patched so many times they were more tape than original material. I worked the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week, mostly because I was in grad school during the day and needed something that paid under the table. The owner, Mr. Papadopoulos, was old-school Greek, didn't ask too many questions and paid cash every Friday. The overnight crowd was what you'd expect. Cab drivers, nurses from Roosevelt Hospital grabbing food after their shifts, drunk people sobering up, the occasional insomniac looking for coffee and company. You learned to read people fast working overnights. Who was harmless, who was trouble, who just needed to be left alone with their eggs. I got good at it. My name's Christina Wolf. I was 26 then, and I'd been working there for about 8 months when he started coming in. The first time I noticed him was a Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday, early Wednesday morning technically. Around 3 a.m., the dead zone when the bar crowd had gone home and the early commuters hadn't started yet. He sat at the counter, 3 stools from the end, and ordered black coffee, nothing else. He was maybe 40, wearing a suit that looked expensive but worn, like he'd been wearing it for days. Clean-shaven, neat hair, completely normal looking except for his hands. They were too pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, and he kept them folded on the counter like he was afraid to move them. I poured the coffee, made small talk the way you do, asked if he wanted anything to eat. He said no thank you in a voice that was pleasant enough, but had no warmth to it, like he was reading from a script. He drank the coffee slowly, methodically, left exact change including a 15% tip, and walked out into the night. Normal, forgettable, except I remembered him because something about those hands bothered me. He came back the next night, same time almost to the minute, same stool, same order. black coffee, nothing else, exact change, perfect tip. I tried to make conversation. Everyone who works overnight develops this relationship with regulars. You end up knowing more about strangers than your own family sometimes. But he deflected every question smoothly, turned it back to me, asked about my night, my classes, my life. He seemed interested, but in a weird way, like he was studying me rather than chatting. This pattern continued for 2 weeks. Every night I worked, he came in at 3 a.m. I started calling him Mr. Suit in my head because I never got his actual name. He always wore the same outfit, or identical outfits, I couldn't tell which. Always the same stool. Always black coffee. And he never, not once, used the bathroom. I started noticing that. 4 hours he'd sit there sometimes, drinking coffee refill after refill, and never once asked where the restroom was. The night it got strange was a Sunday going into Monday. The diner was emptier than usual, just me and Mr. Suit and one other customer. This older Dominican lady named Mrs. Rivera who lived in the neighborhood and came in sometimes when she couldn't sleep. Mr. Suit was at his usual spot and Mrs. Rivera was in a booth by the window. I was refilling the coffee when Mrs. Rivera called me over, quiet, urgent. "Mija," she said, keeping her voice low, "that man at the counter, don't serve him anymore." I looked at her confused. She was staring at Mr. Suit with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Fear, real, deep fear. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Because I can't see him in the window reflection," she said. "Look at the window, look at the reflection. He's not there." I turned to look, trying to be subtle about it. The window behind her reflected the diner interior clearly. I could see myself, see Mrs. Rivera, see the empty stools, the counter, everything except Mr. Suit. His stool looked empty in the reflection. The coffee cup he was drinking from appeared to be floating in midair, tipping by itself. I felt something cold slide down my spine. I told Mrs. Rivera I'd be right back and walked behind the counter, my hands shaking enough that I had to grip the coffee pot with both hands. Mr. Suit looked up at me and smiled, and I noticed for the first time that his smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were flat, like glass eyes in a taxidermied animal. "More coffee?" I asked, my voice somehow steady. "No thank you, Christina," he said. "I think I have what I came for." I hadn't been wearing a name tag that night. I'd forgot it at home. There was no way he should have known my name. I opened my mouth to say something, I don't even know what, when he stood up from the stool. He stood up in a way that was wrong, like his body unfolded in too many sections, like he had extra joints in his legs. He was taller than I thought, much taller, his head almost brushing the ceiling tiles. "You should quit this job," he said, still in that pleasant, empty voice. "Nothing good happens here after dark." He walked toward the door and I noticed he didn't make any sound. His footsteps were completely silent on the tile floor. He pushed open the door and I heard the bell jingle, but when I looked at the window reflection, the door never moved. It stayed closed. But he was gone, vanished into the street, and only then did I see his reflection fade slowly into the glass like an afterimage, there and then not there. Mrs. Rivera had her rosary out. She was praying in Spanish, rapid and intense, and when I looked at her, she just shook her head and left money on the table and walked out without another word. I stood there behind the counter, alone in the diner, and realized I could smell something. Formaldehyde. Strong and chemical, the smell of death preserved. I looked down at where Mr. Suit had been sitting. The coffee cup was there, still half full. The counter where his hands had been resting was wet, not with coffee but with something clear and viscous like oil or glycerin. And pressed into that wetness were handprints, but they weren't normal handprints. Each finger had left a double impression, like he had 2 sets of bones in each digit. I closed the diner early that night, made up an excuse about the grill malfunctioning, locked the doors, called Mr. Papadopoulos at 4 in the morning and told him I felt sick. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I sat in the locked diner with all the lights on until sunrise, watching the street, making sure that thing didn't come back. He never did. I worked there for another 3 months and Mr. Suit never returned. But sometimes I'd feel it around 3 a.m., this sense of being watched. I'd look up at the window reflections and count the people in the diner and count them again in the glass, making sure the numbers matched. They always did after that night, but I never stopped checking. I quit eventually, got a different job, daytime hours, normal people. But every so often I walk past the Starlight Diner during the day and I look in the windows and I wonder how many other regulars they have that don't cast reflections. I wonder how many cups of coffee get served to things that aren't quite people. And I wonder what Mr. Suit meant when he said he got what he came for. Because the way he said it made it sound like he'd been feeding on something. And I have a terrible feeling I know what it was. Story 4. I became the superintendent of the building on Rivington Street because the last guy died. That probably should have been my first warning, but I was desperate for an apartment I could actually afford, and the deal was too good to pass up. Free 2-bedroom in the basement, utilities included, plus a small salary for managing the building. The building itself was old, built in 1887 according to the cornerstone, 6 stories of brick and iron fire escapes, the kind of tenement that had probably housed 3 families before back when the Lower East Side was full of immigrants trying to survive. My name is Victor Chen. I was 32, and I'd been doing building maintenance work since I dropped out of City College. The job seemed straightforward. Collect rent, handle repairs, deal with tenant complaints, keep the boiler running. The landlord, this guy named Sal Romano who lived in Florida and managed the property remotely, told me the previous super, Frank Kowalski, had a heart attack in the basement. Natural causes, he said, unfortunate, but these things happen. The basement apartment was actually nice once I cleared out Frank's stuff. He'd been a hoarder, newspapers stacked to the ceiling, old tools everywhere, random furniture blocking the hallway. It took me 3 days to clear it enough to move in. The apartment had 2 sections, the living space in front, and behind that, through a metal door, the mechanical room where the boiler and electrical panels lived. The mechanical room had another door at the far end, old and wooden, that led to a sub-basement I assumed was just crawl space. That door was padlocked, big old master lock, solid and unmovable. I asked Sal about it, and he said he didn't have a key, said it had been locked since before he bought the building. Just leave it, he told me. Nothing down there anyway. Storage, probably, maybe coal room from before they converted to oil. I left it alone for the first month. Got to know the tenants, fixed a few leaks, learned the building's rhythms. It was a quiet place mostly, older residents who'd been there for decades, a few younger people who'd scored rent-stabilized apartments and would never leave. The building had that particular smell old New York buildings have, cooking from multiple generations, old wood, radiator heat, time itself. The noises started in February. I'd be in my apartment watching TV or reading, and I'd hear someone moving around in the mechanical room. Heavy footsteps, dragging sounds like someone was rearranging the space. I'd go check, find nothing, everything exactly as I'd left it. I chalked it up to pipes or the boiler cycling, old building noises. Then I started hearing it from behind the locked door. Not every night, but often enough that I couldn't ignore it. Movement in the sub-basement. Something walking around down there in that crawl space that supposedly had nothing in it. I told myself it was rats, maybe raccoons that had found a way in from outside, but the sounds were too heavy, too measured, too much like footsteps. I was lying in bed one night, maybe 2 a.m., when I heard my name, clear as anything, coming from the mechanical room. Victor. Just that, my name, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from very far away. Then a knock on the metal door, 3 times, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I got up, grabbed a flashlight and a wrench for protection and went to check. The mechanical room was empty. boiler humming its normal hum, everything in place. But the knocking came again, and this time I realized it was coming from the wooden door, from the sub-basement. Something down there was knocking from the inside, and it knew my name. "Who's there?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. The knocking stopped. I heard footsteps moving away from the door, descending, going down deeper into whatever was beneath the building. Then silence, complete total silence. Even the boiler seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. I called Sal the next morning, told him I needed the key to that door. He got annoyed, said there was no key, it was locked before his time, leave it alone. I told him I heard sounds down there. He laughed, said every super thinks they hear things, buildings make noise, it's normal. Then he said something that stuck with me. Frank asked about that door too, wanted to cut the lock. I told him the same thing I'm telling you, leave it alone. Some doors are locked for good reasons. I should have listened. Instead, I bought bolt cutters. Heavy-duty ones, 40 inches long, capable of cutting through hardened steel. I waited until Saturday afternoon when most of the tenants were out, and I cut that lock. It took 3 tries, but the shackle finally snapped. I pulled the lock off and opened the door. The smell hit me first. Not decay, not sewage, something else. Old air. Air that hadn't moved in decades, stale and thick and wrong. The stairs beyond led down into darkness, stone steps worn smooth in the middle from centuries of use. I shined my flashlight down and couldn't see the bottom. The beam just disappeared into black. I'm not stupid. I didn't go down. But I stood there in the doorway looking down into that darkness, and I felt something looking back. I know how that sounds, but I could feel a tension on me, cold and patient, something aware that I'd opened the door. I closed it, put a new lock on it, even stronger than the first. But it was too late. That night, the noises got worse. Not just footsteps, but voices now, multiple voices, having conversations in languages I didn't recognize. And the knocking started happening on my bedroom wall. The wall that faced toward the sub-basement. Rhythmic knocking, hours at a time, like something was trying to communicate or drive me insane. The tenants started complaining. Mrs. Goldstein in 2B said she heard voices in her walls. The young couple in 4A said their daughter was talking to someone at night, someone she called the man from downstairs. I checked every apartment, checked every wall cavity I could access, found nothing, but the complaints kept coming. 2 weeks after I cut that lock, I came home to find my apartment door open. I knew I'd locked it. I always locked it. I went inside carefully, wrench in hand, clearing each room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. On my kitchen table was a key, old iron key, probably 100 years old, with a tag attached. The tag had one word written on it in ancient, faded handwriting: basement. I picked up the key and felt how cold it was, cold enough to hurt. And I knew immediately what it was for, not the new lock I'd put on. The original lock from when that door was first sealed. Somehow that key had come up from the sub-basement, through walls and floors, and laid itself on my table like an invitation. That night I woke up at 3 a.m. to find wet footprints leading from the mechanical room into my bedroom. They stopped at the foot of my bed. Barefoot prints, adult-sized, dripping with water that smelled like rust and earth. I turned on the light, and the prints were still there, glistening, fresh. But there was no one in the room. Just the prints and the sense of something standing at the end of my bed watching me sleep. I moved out the next day. Told Sal I had a family emergency, broke my lease, left most of my stuff behind. He was angry, threatened to sue, but I didn't care. I slept on a friend's couch for a month until I found another place far uptown, a building with no basement, nothing below the ground floor but concrete. I heard through the grapevine that Sal hired a new super. Young guy, also desperate for cheap housing. I wonder if Sal told him about the door. I wonder if he gave him the same warning about leaving it locked. I wonder if that key is still sitting on the kitchen table, waiting for someone curious enough to use it. But mostly I try not to think about what I heard in those voices from the sub-basement, because once, just once, I heard something that sounded like Frank Kowalski, and he was screaming. Story 5. The Holloway Psychiatric Center sat in the Bronx, a sprawling complex built in the 1920s when they still called it an asylum. By the time I started working there in 2019, it had been through multiple renovations and reforms, but the bones of the building were still original. Long corridors with rooms on either side, high ceilings, windows with bars. I was a night nurse on Ward D, the secure ward, where they kept patients who were either dangerous to themselves or couldn't be trusted on the general floors. The pay was good, the work was hard, and you learned quickly not to get attached. My name is Jennifer Akiniemi. I'm 34 now, but I was 31 then, and I'd been working psych for about 6 years. You develop a thick skin in that environment. You have to. You see things, hear things, deal with people in the worst moments of their lives, and you learn to separate the clinical from the personal. Most of the time, what patients experience is explainable: medication, side effects, psychotic breaks, hallucinations. You treat the symptoms, adjust the dosages, document everything. But Ward D had a room that bothered everyone. Room 217. It was at the far end of the East Corridor, isolated from the other patient rooms, with extra soundproofing because it had been used for restraint cases back before those practices were reformed. We used it for storage mostly, extra linens, equipment we didn't have space for in the utility closets. It stayed locked, and we only went in there during inventory. The problem was that patients kept talking about it. Patients who'd never been to Ward D before, who had no way of knowing the layout, would mention room 217. They'd say things like, "The man in 217 wants to talk to me." Or, "Can you tell 217 to be quiet?" Or, "Why do you keep someone in there alone?" We'd check, document the statements as part of their symptomatology, adjust medications. But it kept happening. I was on night shift with another nurse named Marcus Green, different Marcus from the subway guy, obviously, and an aide named Sophia Flores. It was a Tuesday around 11 p.m. and the ward was settled for the night. Most patients were asleep, a few were watching TV in the common area, everything routine. We were at the nurse's station doing charting when one of our patients, Mrs. Chen, came up to the desk. She was elderly, dementia with some paranoid features, generally sweet but confused. "The man in 217 is walking again," she said, matter of fact, like she was reporting that dinner was ready. Marcus and I exchanged a look. Mrs. Chen had mentioned 217 before, but this was the first time she'd said someone was walking. We asked her what she meant. She pointed down the East Corridor toward the storage room. "He's walking back and forth. I can hear him. He sounds agitated." I told her I'd check it out, mostly to reassure her, and walked down the corridor with my flashlight even though the hall lights were on. The corridor was empty. I stood outside room 217 and listened. Nothing. Complete silence. The door was locked as always. I checked the lock, solid and secure, and returned to tell Mrs. Chen everything was fine. Except an hour later, 2 other patients mentioned it. Different patients, one with schizophrenia and one with bipolar disorder, both asking why someone was pacing in 217. Marcus went to check this time, and he heard nothing either. We documented it, noted the shared delusion pattern, and made a note to mention it at the morning meeting. At 2 a.m., I was doing bed checks, walking the quiet corridors with my small flashlight, making sure everyone was accounted for and safe. I walked past room 217 and heard it. Footsteps inside the locked room. Clear, deliberate pacing. Back and forth, the rhythm of someone agitated, someone who couldn't rest. I stopped outside the door, my heart rate picking up despite my training. I told myself it was pipes or the HVAC system, some mechanical explanation, but it sounded exactly like footsteps. I radioed Marcus to come down, and when he arrived, we both stood there listening. The footsteps continued, steady and relentless. "Could be rats in the walls," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Those would have to be human-sized rats," I replied. We decided to open the door. We had the key, we had authorization, and we needed to document whatever was causing the sound. Marcus unlocked it while I stood behind him, flashlight ready. The door swung open to reveal exactly what should be there: metal shelving units stacked with linens, equipment boxes, cleaning supplies. No person, no animal, nothing that could make footsteps. The room was cold. Much colder than the hallway, cold enough that our breath was visible. The thermometer on the wall read 53 degrees, which was impossible. The building's heating system didn't have zone controls that precise, and there was no reason for this specific room to be 20 degrees colder than everywhere else. "I'm documenting this," Marcus said. "Maintenance needs to check the HVAC." We were about to leave when I noticed something on the floor. Wet footprints. Not tracks leading in or out, just footprints in the middle of the room, like someone had been standing there in one spot, dripping. The prints were adult-sized, barefoot, and they glistened under our flashlights. I bent down and touched one. The liquid was ice cold and had a strange consistency, thicker than water. When I smelled my finger, it had no odor at all, just cold. We left the room, locked it, and radioed Sophia to meet us at the nurse's station. We needed to document what we'd found, and we needed to decide whether to call our supervisor. But when we got back to the station, Sophia was standing in the corridor, staring down toward room 217, her face pale. "Did you see him?" she asked. "See who?" Marcus asked. "The patient, the one who walked past the station and went down that hallway. I called out, but he didn't stop. I was about to go after him, but then you radioed." We checked every patient room, counted every person on the ward. Everyone was accounted for. Nobody had left their rooms. Sophia insisted she'd seen someone, a male patient in a hospital gown, walking with this strange gait, jerky and wrong, heading toward the east corridor. The three of us went back to room 217. Marcus unlocked it again, and this time we all saw it. The metal shelving unit at the back of the room had been moved. Not dramatically, but it had definitely shifted about a foot to the left, leaving marks on the floor where it had scraped. And behind where the unit had been, we could see a dark gap in the wall. Not a hole, more like the plaster had been removed or had fallen away, revealing a hollow space behind. I shined my flashlight into the gap. The beam illuminated a narrow space between the walls, old framing and brick, pipes running vertically, and scratched into the brick I could see writing. The same words repeated over and over, dozens of times, carved deep. "Get out, get out, get out, get out." Something moved in that gap. I only saw it for a second before I jerked the flashlight away, but it was enough. A face pressed against the inside of the wall cavity, looking out at us through the opening. Not a normal face. The features were elongated, stretched vertically, and the mouth was open too wide, like the jaw had come unhinged. We ran. All three of us, professional training forgotten, ran back to the nurse's station and locked ourselves in. We called security, called our supervisor, told them we needed someone to check room 217 immediately. Security arrived within 5 minutes, 2 guards who clearly thought we were overreacting. They went down to check while we watched on the monitor. They found nothing. The room was exactly as it should be, shelving unit in its normal position, no gap in the wall, no footprints on the floor. They checked the wall we'd pointed to and reported it was solid plaster, no damage, no writing. They thought we were either pranking them or having some kind of collective stress reaction. But the next morning, during shift change, we reviewed the security footage. The cameras covered the corridors but not inside the rooms. On the footage at 2:17 a.m., you could clearly see the three of us entering room 217. You could see us reacting to something, backing away, our body language showing fear. And you could see something else. For just 3 frames, less than a second, you could see a shadow pass in front of the camera in the corridor. A human-shaped shadow, but wrong, too tall with arms that hung down almost to its knees, and if you paused it at exactly the right frame, you could see it wasn't casting a shadow on the floor. It was a shadow itself, moving independently, walking down the corridor toward the exit door that led to the stairwell. I transferred to day shift after that. Marcus quit a week later, got a job at a clinic in Queens. Sophia stuck with nights but refused to walk down the east corridor alone. Room 217 is still there, still locked, still used for storage, but I heard through the grapevine that they sealed that wall cavity. Filled it with concrete, no explanation given to staff, just a maintenance note about structural reinforcement. I still work at Holloway, different ward now, different building. But sometimes I see patients from Ward D in the cafeteria or during transport, and sometimes they mention room 217. They say the man is quieter now, he doesn't pace as much, but he's still there, they say, still there, still waiting. And when I dream about that face in the wall, that stretched, impossible face with its unhinged jaw, I wonder what it was waiting for, and I wonder if sealing it in the wall was the right choice, or if we just trapped something that should never have been trapped. Story 6. The warehouse sat in Long Island City, right on the edge of the water where you could see the Manhattan skyline across the East River. It was one of those massive distribution centers, couple 100,000 square feet, high ceilings with rows of industrial shelving that stretched back so far you couldn't see the rear wall. I worked overnight inventory 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., basically walking the aisles with a scanner, checking stock levels, making sure nothing was stolen or misplaced. The company was some kind of import business, never totally clear on the specifics. Lots of boxes from overseas that got sorted and shipped to retailers. I'm Marco Delgado, I was 28 and I needed the job. The warehouse paid decent for overnight work, and they didn't ask too many questions about your background, which worked for me since I had a record from when I was younger. Nothing serious, but enough that most places wouldn't hire me. The crew was small for night shift. Me, 2 other inventory guys named Deshaun and Tommy, a forklift operator, and a security guard named Ron who mostly sat in the office watching cameras and sleeping. The warehouse was unsettling even on a normal night. Too big, too empty, those long aisles of shelving creating corridors that all looked identical. The lighting was motion activated to save energy, so you walk through darkness until the sensors picked you up. Then the fluorescence would flicker on overhead with that distinctive industrial hum. Behind you, the lights would shut off automatically after a few minutes, leaving you in this bubble of light surrounded by dark. You could hear the other workers sometimes, their footsteps echoing, voices carrying weird across all that empty space, but you couldn't see them. Things started getting weird about 3 months into the job. It was winter, January maybe, and we were doing a full inventory audit, which meant all of us spread out across different sections, scanning every single item. I was assigned to Section G, which was in the back corner of the warehouse, furthest from the loading docks and the office. The section stored small electronics, headphones, cables, chargers, that kind of thing, stacked on shelves that went up maybe 20 feet. I was scanning boxes on my elevated picker when I noticed someone standing at the end of the aisle. Just standing there, not moving, maybe 50 feet away. The lights had activated when I entered, so I could see him clearly. He was wearing the same uniform we all wore, reflective vest, hard hat, company ID clipped to his chest, but something about his posture was off. Too straight, too still, like he was a mannequin someone had dressed up and left there. "Hey," I called out. "You doing this section too?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there facing me, arms at his sides. I figured he couldn't hear me. The warehouse acoustics were weird, sound got swallowed by all the space and inventory. I lowered my picker and walked toward him, my scanner beeping as I passed boxes. As I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, he turned and walked around the corner of the aisle. Not hurried, just a smooth turn and walk, disappearing from sight. I followed him around the corner. The aisle was empty, nobody there. The lights extended down the entire length, and there was nowhere to hide, no cross aisles for at least 100 feet. He couldn't have reached the far end that fast, and I would have heard him running, but he was gone. I radioed Deshaun, asked if he was in Section G. He radioed back that he was in Section C, on the other side of the building. Tommy was in Section K. The forklift operator was moving pallets near the loading dock. Nobody was in my area. Ron, the security guard, confirmed on the cameras that I was the only person in Section G. I went back to work, telling myself I'd seen a reflection or something, weird shadow play from the lights, but it nagged at me. That figure had been too clear, too defined, and the way it moved, that smooth mechanical turn, bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. It happened again 2 nights later. Different section, Section M this time, and I saw 2 of them. Both wearing our uniform, both standing motionless at the end of an aisle, positioned like they were waiting for something. I watched them from a distance, not approaching this time. They stood there for maybe 30 seconds, perfectly still, and then walked away in different directions, moving in perfect synchronization. When I radioed the others, everyone was accounted for, and Ron confirmed I was alone in that section. Deshaun and Tommy started seeing them too. We compared notes during break, sitting in the break room under the harsh lights, drinking bad coffee from the machine. Deshaun had seen one in Section D, standing on top of a shelving unit, somehow 30 feet up, looking down at him. Tommy had seen 3 of them in Section P, standing in a row, all facing the same direction like soldiers. "They're watching us," Tommy said, and we all knew he was right. We were being observed systematically by something that looked like us but was. Ron denied seeing anything on the cameras. He got defensive when we pushed him, said we were probably seeing each other and getting confused by the size of the place, but his face said otherwise. He looked nervous, kept glancing at his monitors like he was afraid of what might show up on them. The night it escalated was a Thursday. We were doing the regular nightly inventory, spread out across our assigned sections. I was in Section Q, scanning a shelf of boxed tablets when I heard the footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps coming from different directions, converging on my location. I stopped scanning and listened. 4, maybe 5 different sets, all walking at the same measured pace, all heading toward my aisle. I backed up slowly, my hand on my radio. The footsteps got closer, and then I saw them emerging from different aisles, stepping into the light. 5 figures in our uniform, all walking toward me with that same mechanical gait. Their faces were wrong. Not deformed, not monstrous, just wrong. The proportions were off, eyes too far apart, mouths too small, everything slightly askew, like someone had described a human face but had never actually seen one. I ran. I dropped my scanner and ran toward the main corridor, my footsteps echoing through the warehouse, and I could hear them behind me. Not running, still walking at that steady pace, but somehow keeping up with me. No matter how fast I ran, when I looked back, they were the same distance away, maintaining their formation, following me through the aisles. I reached the main corridor and saw Deshaun and Tommy running from different directions. They'd seen them too. We converged at the security office, bursting through the door, and Ron was gone, just gone. His coffee was still warm, his chair was still spinning, but he'd vanished. The monitors showed the warehouse floor. We could see ourselves on one screen, huddled in the office, and on the other screens we could see them, dozens of them. They were throughout the warehouse, standing in aisles, positioned at regular intervals, all facing toward the office, just standing, watching, waiting. "What the fuck are they?" Tommy whispered. Nobody had an answer. We locked the door, called 911, told them we had intruders in the warehouse. The police arrived within 10 minutes, 3 officers who cleared the building with their flashlights and found nothing. No figures, no Ron, no evidence anyone had been there except us. But when they reviewed the security footage, they saw it. Brief glimpses, partial frames, figures that appeared and disappeared, always at the edges of camera range. And in one clear shot, they saw Ron. He was standing in Section A, surrounded by those figures, all of them standing in a circle around him. He was facing the camera, his mouth open like he was screaming, but the audio didn't pick up any sound. Then the frame glitched, and when it resolved, he was gone. They were all gone. The police filed a missing persons report for Ron. They investigated the warehouse, brought in dogs, searched every section. Nothing. The company shut down operations for a week, brought in new security, new management, talked about how it was probably a mental health crisis and Ron had walked off the job. But they couldn't explain the footage. They couldn't explain what 3 workers saw. I quit the next day. Thus Sean and Tommy quit too. We didn't talk about it after, didn't stay in touch. What would we even say? The warehouse is still operating. I drive past it sometimes. They have new workers now, new overnight crews. I wonder if they see them. I wonder if those figures are still there, standing in the aisles, watching, learning, waiting for something. And I wonder what happened to Ron, because sometimes late at night, I dream about that security footage, that image of him surrounded by those things, mouth open in a silent scream. And in the dream, I can hear what he was trying to say, and it's just one word, repeated over and over. Run. Story 7. Pelham Bay Park sits in the northeast Bronx, over 2,000 acres of forest and marsh and shoreline, the largest park in New York City. Most people don't realize how wild it actually is. You can walk into the interior sections and not see another person for hours, just trees and trails and the occasional deer. I worked park maintenance, overnight shift, mostly because that's when we did the heavy equipment work. Tree removal, trail grading, facility repairs, anything too disruptive or dangerous to do when visitors were around. My name's Alana Sterling. I'm 37 now, but this happened when I was 35, about 2 years ago. I'd been with Parks Department for 8 years, moved up from seasonal work to full-time, and I liked the overnight shifts. The parks transformed at night, became different places, and you felt like you had this massive territory to yourself. It was peaceful, usually. The assignment came down in late September. A big oak had come down near the Hunter Island section, blocking one of the secondary trails. Not a priority, but it needed clearing before winter. My supervisor, this older guy named Keith Brubaker, assigned me and my coworker Luis Mendez to handle it. We'd go in with chainsaws and a small utility truck, cut up the tree, haul away the debris. Standard work, maybe 4 hours total. We entered the park around midnight, drove the utility truck down the access road until it ended, then hiked in about half a mile with our equipment. The moon was bright, almost full, and we had headlamps and work lights, so visibility wasn't an issue. The tree was right where the GPS said it would be, a huge red oak that had cracked at the base and fallen across the trail. Maybe 80 feet long, trunk 3 feet in diameter. A good night's work. Louis fired up his chainsaw and started on the crown, while I worked on the trunk from the other end. The forest filled with the sound of engines and cutting, that loud mechanical roar that drowns out everything else. We worked for maybe an hour, cutting the tree into manageable sections, stacking the wood off the trail. It was during a pause when we'd both shut off our saws to reposition that Louis pointed into the trees. "You see that?" he asked. I looked where he was pointing. About 30 yards into the forest, I could see a light, not a flashlight, something else. A steady glow, yellowish, low to the ground. It moved slowly between the trees, bobbing slightly like someone carrying a lantern. "Probably another work crew," I said, though I knew that was unlikely. Keith would have told us if anyone else was in this section. Louis radioed Keith anyway. Keith confirmed we were the only crew in Pelham Bay that night. No other assignments, no other personnel. We stood there watching the light move parallel to the trail, maybe 50 feet away now, steady and deliberate. "Hello," I called out. "Parks Department, you're not supposed to be in here after dark." The light stopped moving, just stopped hanging there in the darkness between the trees, no response, no sound. Then it slowly tilted, like whoever was holding it had turned to face us. I felt my skin prickle. Something about that movement was wrong. "Let's finish the job," Louis said quietly. "Fuck whoever that is." We went back to work, but we both kept glancing at that light. It stayed where it was, not moving, just hovering there in the forest. After about 10 minutes, it began moving again, but this time it was circling us. Slowly, carefully, maintaining the same distance, moving through the trees in a wide arc around our work site. "That's not a person," Louis said, and I knew he was right. A person would respond when called. A person would make noise moving through the underbrush. This light moved silently, smoothly, like it was floating rather than being carried. We worked faster, cut the remaining sections, loaded what we could onto the utility truck, marked the rest for later pickup. The light completed its circle and started a second rotation, still maintaining that precise distance. I could see it clearly now in gaps between the trees. It wasn't a lantern. The glow had no source, no visible flame or bulb. It was just light, hanging in the air, pulsing slightly like it was breathing. We were loading the last pieces when Louis grabbed my arm. He pointed behind me, back up the trail toward where we'd entered. Another light, identical to the first, same yellowish glow, same hovering quality. This one was positioned on the trail itself, blocking our exit route. "There's another one," Louis said, and pointed to our right. A third light positioned at the same distance as the others. Then a fourth appeared behind us in the direction of the fallen tree. We were surrounded. 4 lights evenly spaced, forming a perfect square around us. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." We gathered our equipment, moving quickly but trying not to panic. The lights remained stationary, watching us. We started walking back toward the utility truck, following the trail, heading directly toward the light that was blocking our path. As we approached it, maybe 20 feet away, it moved, not away from us, toward us. It glided forward about 10 feet, then stopped, forcing us to either turn back or pass very close to it. "Walk straight through," I said. "Don't stop, don't look at it." We walked. As we passed the light, maybe 5 feet away from it, I felt cold. Not like winter cold, like temperature drop cold. Cold that went into your bones, made your joints ache, made your teeth hurt, and I smelled something. Ozone, like after a lightning strike, but mixed with something organic, rot and electricity. The light didn't follow us, but the others did. All 4 lights began moving, maintaining their formation, keeping us in the center as we walked back toward the truck. They matched our pace exactly, speeding up when we hurried, slowing when we slowed. Through the trees, I could see them pulsing, brightening, and dimming in unison, like they were communicating. We reached the truck and threw our equipment in the bed, not bothering to secure it properly. Louis started the engine while I jumped in the passenger side, and we pulled away fast, the truck bouncing over ruts in the access road. I looked back through the rear window and saw the lights at the edge of the road where the forest met the clearing. They weren't following anymore, just hovering there watching us leave. We didn't talk on the drive out, didn't radio Keith, just drove in silence until we reached the maintenance depot, parked the truck, and sat there in the parking lot as the sun started coming up. Finally, Louis said, "We're not reporting this." "Why not?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because they'll think we're crazy, or high, or making excuses. We finish the job tomorrow, daytime, with a full crew." Went back the next day. 6 of us, broad daylight, sunny afternoon. The site looked completely normal. We cleared the remaining wood, swept the trail, checked for any damage. Everything was fine, professional, routine work. But I noticed something none of the others saw. On the trees surrounding where we'd been working, about chest height, were marks. Burn marks, perfect circles about 6 inches in diameter, like something hot had pressed against the bark. 4 trees, evenly spaced, forming a square. I took photos with my phone but never showed anyone. What would I say? Here's evidence that we were marked by something, but I don't know what it was or why or what it means. I kept the photos, though. Sometimes I look at them and try to convince myself they're natural, some kind of fungus or disease. But the circles are too perfect, too evenly spaced. I still work for Parks Department, but I don't take overnight assignments in Pelham Bay anymore. I make excuses, cite scheduling conflicts, volunteer for less desirable jobs elsewhere. My supervisor probably thinks I'm being difficult, but I don't care. Because twice since that night, I've driven past the park entrance after dark and I've seen them. Lights in the forest, multiple lights moving between the trees, not near the trail, deep in the interior where no one goes, moving in formation, pulsing, searching for something. And once, about 6 months ago, I was driving home from a friend's place late at night, taking the Hutchinson Parkway, and I saw them in the tree line beside the road. Just for a second, 4 lights evenly spaced, pulsing in unison. They were outside the park. They were spreading. And I wonder how many other people see them and say nothing, because who would believe us? Who would believe that something is living in New York City's forests, something that watches and marks and waits? But I believe it because I have the scars on my hands to prove it. Burns I noticed 3 days after that night, 4 small circular marks, one on each finger of my right hand, the hand I used to push away a tree branch when we were running. Except I don't remember touching anything hot. I just remember the cold, and the light, and the feeling of being hunted by something that had all the time in the world. Story 8. The Eldridge Theater sat on the Lower East Side, a forgotten building that dated back to 1903, when that neighborhood was full of Yiddish theaters and vaudeville houses. By the time I started working there, it had been closed for decades, the interior gutted by water damage and neglect, the facade covered in graffiti and scaffolding. The building had been sold to some developer who wanted to convert it into luxury apartments, and my job was overnight security during the initial renovation phase, basically making sure nobody broke in to steal copper or vandalize the construction equipment. I'm Daniel Torres, I was 31, and I needed the work. The security company I worked for assigned me to the Eldridge because nobody else wanted it. The building had a reputation, nothing specific, just general bad energy. The previous guard had quit after 2 weeks. No explanation, and the one before that lasted 3 days. The company didn't tell me that when they gave me the assignment, but I found out later from the day foreman, a guy named Jack Brennan who'd worked construction in the neighborhood for 30 years. "Building doesn't want to be apartments," Jack told me on my first night, half joking but not really. "You'll see what I mean." The theater had the layout typical of those old houses. Lobby entrance, central aisle with seating on the ground floor, balcony above, stage at the front with backstage areas and dressing rooms. Most of the seats were gone, the floor was concrete and exposed beams, but the bones of the space remained. The stage still had its proscenium arch, the backstage still had the narrow corridors and small rooms where performers used to prepare. During the day, it was full of construction noise and workers. At night alone, it felt vast and wrong. My shift started at 10 p.m. I'd lock the front entrance behind me, do a walkthrough of the entire building, then settle in the makeshift security office Jack's crew had set up in what used to be the box office. I had a desk, a coffee maker, a portable heater, and a monitor showing feeds from the 4 security cameras they'd installed. Pretty standard setup. The first week was boring. I did my rounds every 2 hours, watched movies on my phone, drank too much coffee. Nothing happened. The second week, I started hearing the music. Faint, barely audible, like someone was playing a piano in another room. I'd hear it during my rounds, usually when I was backstage in the dressing room corridor. Old-fashioned music, ragtime, or maybe early jazz, the kind of thing that would have been popular when the theater was operating. I'd stop and listen, try to pinpoint the source, but as soon as I focused on it, the music would fade away. I mentioned it to Jack the next morning. He nodded like he'd expected it. Buildings got history, he said. Used to be a playhouse, then it was a movie theater, then it sat empty for like 40 years. Who knows what's embedded in the walls? You're probably hearing vibrations from the street or the subway, your brain's interpreting it as music. That made sense, I accepted it, but the music kept happening and it got clearer. By the third week, I could make out melodies, specific songs, and I started noticing something else. When the music played, the temperature would drop, not dramatically but noticeably. My breath would mist and the cold would make my joints ache. Then I started seeing the lights, stage lights specifically. The theater's electrical system had been partially disconnected and the old stage lights hadn't worked in decades. But sometimes during my rounds, I'd see a glow coming from the auditorium. I'd walk in and see the stage illuminated, not brightly but distinctly, like someone had turned on work lights. But there were no work lights on stage. The glow had no source. It just existed, hanging in the air above the stage, casting shadows that moved wrong. I documented everything. Took photos, videos, temperature readings. Most of the photos showed nothing unusual, but occasionally I'd catch something, an unexplained light source, a shadow that didn't match any physical object, orbs that the security company later said were probably dust. But the videos were harder to explain. On 3 separate occasions, my phone captured audio of that piano music, clear and undeniable. And once, in a video I took of the stage, you could see movement in the shadows. Something walking across the stage, visible only in silhouette, moving with an old-fashioned gait. The night it became undeniable was a Monday in late October. I was doing my midnight round, walking through the backstage area with my flashlight. I passed the dressing rooms, 5 small rooms on either side of a narrow corridor, doors hanging open, interiors empty except for construction debris. As I passed the 3rd room on the left, I saw someone sitting at the mirror. I stopped, my heart jumping, my flashlight swinging back to illuminate the room. A woman sat at the dressing table, her back to me, wearing what looked like a period costume, high-necked dress, hair pinned up in an elaborate style. She was looking at herself in the mirror, which shouldn't have been there because the mirrors had all been removed. But I could see her reflection clearly, see her face, young and pale, expression blank. "Hey," I said, my voice rough. "You can't be in here." She didn't react, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. Just sat there, staring at herself in the mirror that didn't exist. I stepped into the doorway, my flashlight fully on her, and I could see her more clearly. Her dress was old, turn-of-the-century old, and her skin had a waxy quality, like she was a figure in a museum diorama, and her reflection in the mirror didn't match her position. She was sitting upright, but her reflection showed her slumped forward, head in her hands. I backed out of the room slowly, walked back down the corridor, my hand shaking enough that the flashlight beam danced across the walls. I was trying to rationalize it, mannequin, elaborate prank, hallucination from too much coffee and too little sleep, when I heard the voice. "Daniel," my name spoken from behind me from the direction of the dressing room, a woman's voice, accented, old-fashioned pronunciation. "Daniel, help me." I ran down the corridor, through the backstage area, out into the main auditorium. The stage lights were on, that impossible glow, and I could see figures moving on the stage. Multiple figures, maybe 6 or 7, dressed in period costumes, performing something. Silent pantomime, exaggerated gestures, the kind of acting style from before films had sound. They moved in unison, perfectly choreographed, and then they all turned to face me in the audience. Their faces were wrong. Makeup too thick, features too exaggerated, eyes too large, and they weren't breathing. Their chests didn't move, their mouths didn't close. They just stood there, staring at me with those painted doll faces, frozen in the middle of their performance. The music started. That piano music, loud now, coming from everywhere at once, and the figures on stage began moving again. They walked to the edge of the stage, lined up in a row, and one by one they bowed, deep theatrical bows holding the position too long. When they straightened up, they were smiling. All of them the same unnatural smile, too wide, showing too many teeth. I left the building, walked out the front entrance, set off the alarm, didn't care. Stood on the sidewalk in the middle of the night, shaking, waiting for my heart to slow down. I called my supervisor, told him I was done, I quit, find someone else. He tried to convince me to stay, offered more money, but I hung up on him. The police came because of the alarm. I told them I'd seen intruders, multiple people in costume, trespassing in the theater. They searched the building, found nothing, no evidence anyone had been inside except me. They checked the security cameras, and the footage showed me doing my rounds normally, then suddenly running from the backstage area and leaving. The cameras never showed anyone else. Not the woman in the dressing room, not the performers on stage, just me alone running from nothing. The theater conversion was completed about a year later. Luxury apartments exactly as planned. I walk past it sometimes, can't help myself. The facade is restored, beautiful old architectural details preserved, ground floor commercial space with a coffee shop and boutique gym. Apartments above with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern fixtures. People live there now, young professionals paying obscene rent for the location and the history. I wonder if they know. I wonder if they hear the piano music late at night, or see the lights, or find themselves avoiding certain rooms for reasons they can't explain. I wonder if the woman is still sitting at her mirror, staring at a reflection that doesn't match reality. And I wonder about those performers, frozen in their bow, smiling their terrible smiles. The theater didn't want to be apartments. Jack was right about that. But someone built apartments anyway, and now people sleep there, live there, completely unaware that they're sharing the space with something that never left. Something that's still performing night after night for an audience that no longer applauds. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror from the night shift. Let me know in the comments which story disturbed you the most, or if you've had your own strange experiences working overnight in New York. Share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there and maybe think twice before taking that overnight.